As you can see, the title of this morning's talk is Unholy Communion, the Spiritual Nature of Abduction Reports. Before we start into this, I must give you a warning. Whenever I share this talk, I share this warning. It's important. The following information may change your preconceived notions of the alien abduction experience. What is alien abduction? This is taken from Wikipedia, okay? The terms alien abduction or the abduction phenomenon describe subjectively real memories of being taken secretly and or against one's will by apparently non-human entities and subjected to complex physical and psychological procedures. What I'm going to share with you today is some of the most powerful evidence in the UFO community about what this experience is about and the entities behind them. We've shared this over the years, and we always get a lot of flack from what I'm about to share. So hang on to your seats. The way that I start with this is I have to take you back to where I started, because this has been a long process of 15 years to get to this point, and I want to share with you how we got here, because it's a sequence of events that you'll see how important all this is once it's all put together. A lot of people ask, how did you even become a UFO investigator? I mean, there's a lot of UFO investigator researchers out there, and it's probably a question some of you have asked. How do these people even get involved in this stuff? For me, it started in 1992. I worked for a major boat company in Florida. I'm from the Kennedy Space Center area, and I had some vacation time during the year in 1992. And I went to visit my brother, who was in the Air Force, stationed up at Elmendorf Air Force Base in Alaska. And I had a week's time off that I could go up there and visit with him. I took my son with me, and my mom went with me. And we went up to visit and have a good time, see the sights. But it's a 10-hour flight out of Orlando, Florida, to go to Alaska. That's a long time on a plane. I needed something to read to keep me occupied. While we were in the airport, I went to the little bookstores they have in the airport, magazines, books, snacks, things like that. I browsed through the magazines. I didn't see anything really that caught my attention. I'm not much into sports and politics and all that. So I went over to the books area, and I'm browsing through the paperbacks that they have. And I came across one particular book, and it caught my eye, and I picked it up and looked at the cover of it. And it looked like a science fiction book. I was an avid science fiction reader when I was a teenager in high school. I actually grew up as an Army brat, and I spent a lot of time overseas growing up in my younger years. We didn't have TV or radio and stuff like that to keep us occupied like you guys got today. So books were a great escapism. And mine was science fiction. I love science fiction. Robert Heinlein, Frederick K. Paul, H.G. Wells, you know, it was great. And as I was looking at this book that I had picked up, it looked like a science fiction book. But when I turned it over and looked at the backside to read the synopsis on what it was about, I was puzzled, because here it looked like any other science fiction book I'd picked up, but it was saying that this was a story about an investigation that was done, and it was based with science fact and full of scientific research, and this was their documentation of their investigation. That book was UFO Crash at Roswell. I'd never heard about UFOs before. I might have seen movies of it, but it never connected. It wasn't something that I was concerned with at all in my life. I was hardworking at the boat company for many years already, raising a son. So I was busy with everyday life. UFOs was the farthest thing from my mind. But when I read this book on that vacation trip, I was hooked. I thought, because all the things that I thought were fantasy in my younger years growing up, these people were saying was real. And how could that possibly be? So I had to know more. When I got back from the trip, I wanted to know more about this subject of UFOs and aliens. I got to have some answers to what I had just read. And it happened to be about 3 or 4 weeks after I got back. I was watching TV at home one night, and it was the local news, and they were doing interviews with local businessmen in the area and new businesses that were opening up. And they were interviewing a fellow who said, was sharing with everybody that he had just opened up a UFO museum on International Drive in Orlando, Florida. And he got into telling about all the information dealing with UFOs over the years and what he had in his museum. It was like a historical walkthrough museum, sort of like what they have downtown here in Roswell. And I thought, wow, this is a place I can go to find out some more. So over the next couple months, I made a number of trips over to meet this fellow, and him and his wife together were running the place. Nice little walkthrough museum, had books in front where you could purchase, little knickknacks and books and stuff like that dealing with UFOs. And as he saw me being local, coming back to see him a number of times, we finally started talking to each other. And he says, "You seem to have a very keen interest in this. Is there anything I can help you with?" And I told him about picking up that first book and it grabbing my attention, and I had to know more. And he says, would you like to be more involved in finding out what this is about? I said, "Well, what do you mean?" He says, "Well, I belong to an organization that researches UFOs, and it's the Mutual UFO Network." Over the next few months, he helped me become a member of MUFON. He helped me work up my investigator status as a field investigator for MUFON, and we became very good friends. I learned what was involved with doing investigations. And being local, I was on the Space Coast, and he's in Central Florida. He said, over on the Space Coast, there's no chapter for MUFON. He said, "I know there's some members over there, but there's no chapter for it. There's nobody running the organization for the county." He said, "Would you be interested in maybe taking charge of that and putting together a group of investigators to cover that area?" And I thought, wow, this sounds interesting. Here I'm going from knowing nothing about UFOs to getting one little book to now working up to I'm going to be in charge of doing investigations in my area. And we took time, we talked to the state director of Florida who lives up in Gulf Breeze and the assistant state director, and they told me what was involved with being a state section director for my county. And I had an interview with them. The fellow from the museum backed up for me because he was the state section director for Orange County there in Central Florida. And they put me through all the paces on what was involved, and I became state section director for the Kennedy Space Center area, Brevard County, Florida, in 1992. What better place to be a UFO investigator? One of the most top secret clearance areas in the country. They got an airspace that's totally controlled, so they say. But amazingly, over the years, we investigated UFOs over their airspace. So that gets quite interesting. So I had a good area to be involved in. We put together monthly meetings, which was required by this, as a state section director for the public to attend in our county. We used the public library. It was open to the public. We wanted to be able to share with the public what MUFON was doing and some of the cases we were working on, and just get them up to date on UFO information. I also had to put together a team of investigators, and it wasn't long before I had 5 good field investigators working under me. And we put the word out there through the sheriff's department, the police department, the fire department, and the news that if anybody reported a UFO sighting, that we would be glad to take the report and follow up on it, because they don't really care to do that. They don't know how to handle it. So we were there for them. This is what MUFON does. MUFON is the largest grassroots scientific-based organization in the world today. There's over 5,000 members of investigators, consultants. You know, we have a lot of tools at our fingertips as MUFON investigators to be able to follow up on reports and do the investigations. As we held our monthly meetings, though, and we were doing sighting reports, we did a number of them over the first couple of years, we started to take a look at what was happening here with the UFO picture. And you know, doing sighting reports, we found after a couple of years of it, it's like chasing your tail. You know? How many sighting reports is it going to take till we figure out what this is? They've been going on since the 40s and 50s. They still don't have an absolute answer to what this phenomenon's about. And looking at the people coming to our meetings, we were hearing stories from people who were saying they were abductees or contactees. And we started listening to them, and they were saying that they had been in contact with these entities that are behind the UFO sightings. Well, we talked about this as investigators, and we said, you know, we can continue to do sightings forever. They've been going on forever, and we may never get to the truth with them. We need to get closer to the source. Well, the contactees and abductees saying they had been in contact with the entities, that's close to the source. So we decided to move our research closer to that source and get into abduction research and try to find out, being closer to the source, what this phenomenon was about. The only problem with that at the time is that MUFON wasn't set up to work with the abduction experiencers. Okay, they're doing scientific-based investigations on UFO sightings. They really didn't have a format to working with the abductions. And we had to kind of separate ourselves to be able to do that. We couldn't do it under the name of MUFON because we had no real guidelines except for what we've been taught as being investigators to do interviews and research and how to document stuff. So we decided to set up a separate entity organization called CE4 Research. And CE4, Close Encounter of the Fourth Kind. That's what that stands for. You got first kind, second kind, third kind. Of course, you've all seen the movie The Third Kind. Fourth kind is abductions. So that's what we titled our group. Even from the beginning, the information was always available to MUFON. We never kept it separate. We always offered it if they wanted to see it. But like I said, they weren't really set up at the time to be involved with that. So we started interviewing the abductees and the contactees that we had come into the meetings over the next couple of years, started documenting all the information. And as we were doing this, we were also learning as much as we could from other researchers who were in this field, the big names, you know, that Bud Hopkins, Whitley Strieber, John Mack, you know, they had done extensive research already. And because the abductees and contactees that we were encountering seemed to have a lot of personal issues, we didn't want to do any more damage to these people by working with them and interviewing them. So we needed to learn as much about them as we could. So we consumed all of the research we could get our hands on from the researchers that were well known that had been working on this for some years. We wanted to be prepared as we went into this so that we wouldn't cause any more harm to these people than what they had gone through already. And I want to give you a little idea of what the abduction experience is about. And one of the best examples of this was written by the late Dr. Carla Turner, who was actually an experiencer herself. And she put together a really good piece to take you through and show you exactly what these experiencers go through. If abduction reports can be believed, and there is no reason to doubt the honesty of the reporters, the abduction phenomenon includes the following details. Aliens can alter our perception